Kevin, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, I'm a freelance writer and independent scholar. I focus mainly on issues of post-capitalist transition. I write a lot of things on liberatory technology and various forms of social organization that I think are the seeds of a future post-capitalist society, and a little bit of stuff as well on crisis tendencies of capitalism.
Cool. And what does this post-capitalist society look like in your view?
Well, I don't like to engage in what Marx called writing recipes for the cookshops of the future. I think it'll be an emergent process growing out of a lot of things right now that are already in existence, but the specific form it takes, it's hard to say. I think the defining features will be the absence of things that we would consider extractive institutions today, institutions for extracting economic rents from artificial scarcity or artificial property rights. And it would be characterized by a much higher degree of self-management and direct democracy than we have at present.
Would that include like government in general?
Well, I'm an anarchist, so I see the state devolving to a lot more direct democracy at the local level and a lot more participatory activity rather than a centralized administrative state. But I see that as an open-ended process taking place as a matter of degree rather than anything we would necessarily see a sharp break, with the sudden or ruptural disappearance of the state.
So my contention with anarchism is that it seemed like the world essentially started off that way before there were any governments. Back like when we were early transitioning between early hominids to humans, it seemed like there were no real laws or rules, and that didn't seem to work out too well for us. It seems like the government has provided a significant number of benefits, and it's made society better overall. And losing those benefits by giving up government seems to be a detriment to society, not necessarily a good thing, even though it does have many bad aspects to it as well.
Well, I'd say there's a big difference between government and governance. And there was a very long period between the early hominids or hunter-gatherer and forager society and what we call the state today. There was a period in the interim of thousands of years after the Neolithic Revolution where people lived in villages and towns and urban aggregations of considerable size with socially enforced rules and organization, but without what we would call states or classes extracting a surplus from the population.
But aren't there some benefits to those, like state-funded programs like NASA, Large Hadron Collider, a lot of the scientific progress and things that we are trying to push the frontiers of humanity on require large sums of money, which aren't really going to be invested in by just regular people?
Oh, I think I don't think we can rule out the potential for what people can accomplish through horizontal organization, and I don't see the disappearance of the state as being incompatible with the continuation of large-scale organization on a horizontal or federal basis. It just won't have the coercive power to collect revenue through taxation.
I'm not sure what you mean, because nowhere in human history has there ever been just a collective choice to invest in scientific technology in the way that the Large Hadron Collider did, or CERN, or any of the fusion reactors at colleges. Like, those are all, government gives you lots of money just to experiment, because research and development is the most expensive process in any government or any organization, because most of your research fails. And a rational human being would not want to invest large sums of money in something that's most likely going to fail. And so regular people choosing to invest in this kind of research and development process, which will most likely fail, seems irrational. Compared to like a government doing it, makes perfect sense, because they're trying to find these very rare kinds of advancements that promote humanity, even at significant costs. So it seems unlikely to me that any kind of human aggregate society would invest in these things versus a government that's pretty rational.
Well, by the same token, you could say that there has never been a human society with a state that hasn't also been characterized by extreme class stratification and economic exploitation, because that's been the primary function of the state, extracting surpluses from the producing majority. We really haven't, since the predominance of the state, we haven't really seen anything that wasn't produced that wasn't under the state, because the state has been the predominant form of organization, and everything that has taken place for good or ill has been within the state framework, and any other alternative means of organization have largely been crowded out by it. So I don't think you can judge what's possible on that basis. Second, I would argue that framing things in terms of money investment is accepting a very historically limited capitalist way of framing things. I don't think a stateless society would just be the kind of society we've got right now, with the state subtracted. The state is one interlocking part of a much larger complex of things that include the capitalist economy, corporate organization, money investment, and so forth. And I think the entire complex of things would be significantly altered, along with the disappearance of the coercive state.
Well, I totally agree that money doesn't matter. Money is something we made up. But I think technological progress, agricultural progress, quality of life, medical progress, those are things that we should be using to measure the success of one economic system over another. And it seems to me that if you have a lot of resources that can be dumped into one area to make growth, that gives your society an advantage. Whereas if it's spread out among a large group of individuals, then it can't be centralized in such a way that you can invest in very large projects to the same degree. And so a society where it is more spread out might be more morally fair, but it would be less technologically advanced, because you don't have large sums of money to invest in certain projects. And it also seems to me that this disparity between very wealthy, very poor, that has nothing to do with economies. That just has to do with nature. Nature just makes certain people better at intelligence, fitness, whatever, than other people. And because of biology, there's always going to be some kind of disparity between the rich and the poor. It has, regardless of what system you use.
There might be, some disparity in people's standard of living based on ability, but I think it would be a tiny fraction of what we have now, because most of this disparity we witness doesn't come from differences in ability. It comes from economic rents on artificial scarcity, or from entry barriers, or monopoly power. We have an entire system set up to transfer wealth from the people who produce it to classes of rent extractors, and a system set up to cause wealth to grow on itself, just as a source of passive income. And once you get to that point, the differences in wealth result mainly from differences in power rather than in differences of ability. Other than that, though, getting back to the idea of dumping large-scale resources into particular efforts, as I said before, I don't see the transition necessarily being a dramatic rupture where everything we have organizationally right now is just torn up by the roots and restarted from scratch. I see no reason why some of the large-scale organizations we have right now would not persist through the transition.
How would they get funding without taxes?
Through the local participatory, local nodules or nodes that participate in them as federal bodies.
I'm not sure what that means. Like, where would NASA and CERN get that?
If you transform NASA and CERN into platforms that are supported by federations of local communities and regions.
Well, like CERN is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry that's in like the middle of Sweden. They don't have the money to fund that within 1,000 square miles of the location. It's a global conglomerate of multiple governments all investing large sums of taxes in order to fund this massive project. There's no local way to fund that. It's just not even possible. Same with NASA. There's no local way to fund NASA. It's too expensive. And the project spans so many different aspects that you need this massive government funding that comes from the entire country to be able to fund it.
Well, I mean, I don't see any reason why local communities cannot federate to support regional platforms of various sorts. Regional federations can't similarly combine at a higher level.
But why would they? So, like, why would anyone in, say, Nevada decide to give 5% of their paycheck to a program in Houston, Texas? Like, they're like, if they have the freedom, they're like, nope, I'm going to keep it in my bank account. Why would I choose to do this?
Well, I mean, it's supposedly a democracy right now where they could vote for the state to stop doing those things if they wanted to. If people would support it for the same reason you do.
I wouldn't. If I had the option, I'd just keep all my money in my bank account too. I wouldn't give any to taxes. So the democracy part seems to be more like who you put in charge, but you don't get to like vote on particular usages of your money, unfortunately. So it doesn't seem like if we did have this level of freedom, the vast majority of government programs probably wouldn't exist because the vast majority of people wouldn't want to support the vast majority of government programs. For example, Republicans wouldn't support any kind of Planned Parenthood, anything, and Democrats wouldn't support any kind of most Republican policies ever. And so that's like 50% of your funding gone for like half the country each.
Yeah. All I can say is what we're talking about right now is, concerning, the very radical distinction between a completely post-capitalist, post-state society and what we have now. And my primary concern is with the transition process itself and the direction of change, and with the general, tendencies in which I would like to see things move, rather than, writing out prescriptions for the end state.
Well, sure, I agree. I think there's lots of ways capitalism fails and could improve, but my concern is that there's more ways that the economy and the government could fail and cause millions of people to starve to death than there are ways that it could successfully improve, just like research and development. There's more ways to fail than to succeed. And so any way that we try to make improvement has to be done in such a way that we anticipate its failure more than its success. And so even though I think it's idealistic to try to figure out all the different ways capitalism can improve, the practical application of that in order to prevent the mass starvation of people by it failing is the difficult thing in my aspect, because I think capitalism is very, very successful. It's not perfect. There's lots of bad things about it, but risking the level of success we have now to try to implement some new policy which only has hypothetical success seems to be a risky venture.
Well, that's why I'm a gradualist. I would like to start out by removing the things I consider the most extractive or exploitive elements, and letting the system adjust in an emergent way to the change, and see what the result is, and then make some more changes of the same sort.
What are some of the things you see as the most bad?
Well, one of the most bad, I would say, is absentee landlordism. I would like to see land ownership gradually shifted from absentee landlordism to the majority of land and natural resources being incorporated into community land trusts, or the sort of natural resource commons that Eleanor Ostrom wrote about. I'd like to see similarly intellectual property law made much less extractive and scaled back, especially patent law, to the extent that patents right now are probably the central form of legal monopoly that global capitalism depends on. If anything, I'd say patents are more protectionist right now in the function they perform for global capitalism than tariffs were 100 years ago.
But don't patents provide a lot of positive aspects too, like incentives in order to innovate? And so keeping those around to some degree is a really good thing that gives people a reason to actually kind of invent and aspire to do things, because they're hoping out for this giant windfall of money because they get a patent.
No, on net, I think they actually hinder innovation more than they promote it. For one thing, I forget the citation, but there have been Federal Trade Commission studies on the effect of patents that found that something like 80% of all product and process innovations that have actually been developed over the past decades would have been developed anyway, just for the sake of competitiveness or without.
There's a lot of background noise. I hear a lot of scratching.
Yeah, it's I've got a cat here that's trying to disrupt things. But most of these process and product innovations would have been developed for the sake of competitiveness anyway. And also, innovation is not something that's just done by individual geniuses. The Edisons or Teslas or whatever. It's the product of social knowledge. It's the product of something called the shoulders of giants effect, where it comes about through the sharing of knowledge, the building on previous contributions, and the effect of patents is to erect toll gates against the sharing of such knowledge and against making use of previous innovations. For example, progress on the steam engine came to a complete halt while James Watt's patent was still in effect.
Well, so for example, if a small company decided to make a new product, they invented some new invention, what's stopping the larger companies from just taking it and then just putting them out of business?
I don't see why. I don't understand why that would necessarily put them out of business.
Well, if I'm making a new product that has some novelty in the industry, and someone can just look at it, copy it, and then make it cheaper because they have more access to industry or whatever, and sell it at a cheaper price for the same product or better, then I'm going to be undercut in the market and lose my market share completely.
Well, you're probably going to recoup most of your investment just from first mover advantages. Plus, you've got the advantage of being identified as the original producer of the product and the consumer goodwill that comes from that.
I don't know anything about consumer goodwill. They don't really care about that. Like everything's made in China today. But like if I had a cartoon, say a character that I wanted to promote, Mickey Mouse, for example, but since I can't patent it, anybody else can use Mickey Mouse in whatever kind of other programs or productions they want. And those become more popular. Mine loses out, and my original character is now hijacked into something I didn't want it to be, something I have no control over. That seems wrong.
Well, the overwhelming majority of cultural creators whose creations appear in the media, whether, musicians, authors, cartoonists, or whatever, get very little of the money that copyrights result in the first place. It's primarily the big media companies that extract most of that wealth from copyrights. It doesn't go to the creators.
That's because they own the copyrights. So like the big media companies own the copyrights.
Yeah. I mean, they pour mouth about how creators deserve to be paid basically as propaganda for enforcing the monopolies that their own wealth comes from, but they screw the creators themselves.
Right, but that's not a patent issue. That's a media company issue. They're big, and so that's signing with them is easier than signing your own patent and producing it.
Yeah, but I mean, it still means that the copyrights aren't doing that much good, to much of the good that's attributed to them today anyway. And I'm a creator myself, and so I have some experience marketing my books without copyright. Everything I have ever written is available for free as a facsimile PDF, and everything I write comes with an open license. I call the Woody Guthrie free license. Anyone that reprints anything of I've written is without permission will be considered a mighty good friend of ours, because we don't give a darn, which is what Woody Guthrie said about his songs. And I think I'm probably making more money selling PDFs directly online or marketing print-on-demand books directly online without enforcing copyright than I would have trying to sell it through a conventional publisher. And I think that's probably true for the overwhelming majority of creators, except for the biggest blockbuster musical acts or the biggest blockbuster authors just because you start out with some pretty overwhelming advantages, being the original creator, and the authenticity and completeness guarantees that you offer in marketing your work directly yourself, that for most people, saving a few cents on particular work doesn't make it worthwhile for all of the effort it takes searching around online for files that may or may not be complete or damaged or whatever. It's only when you rely on copyright to charge a high enough fee to make it worthwhile to pirate stuff that piracy becomes a problem. That's why piracy virtually disappeared back when Apple introduced iTunes that were priced reasonably, and why movie piracy dwindled down almost to nothing back when everything was available through Netflix alone. And it looks like the proliferation of different streaming services with their own ghettoized selection list is probably going to lead to a resurgence of file sharing, which is another thing right there. I mean, copyright law right now is virtually impossible to enforce. So the revenues going to creators depend primarily on the difficulty or inconvenience of file sharing compared to paying a modest amount for the work than it does on the enforcement of the law itself.
I'm not sure what you mean there. So, like, if someone's trying to make a living off of their product and they've invested a long number of years on this product, I think it's obvious that someone else shouldn't just be able to take the product and make it on their own. Like, just the fact that they were the first in no way guarantees they're going to make any money, because it takes time to actually build up a consumer base. Advertising is the number one successful metric for growing your brand, and big companies have more access to advertising. And so if you make a product that's very successful on a small scale, they're going to pick it up, steal it, and then advertise it, and theirs is going to take over and yours is just going to die. It seems wrong to think that they're going to gain enough money from being first just because they were first without that advertising advantage. And it seems like not having, because patents are mostly used to apply on the larger scale, bigger companies versus bigger companies. You're right, it's not really easy to enforce on small scales. Like I do nothing but pirate music and movies. I never pay for them ever under any circumstances, and that's not really going to be easy to enforce, which is fine. It's the big, if a big company takes it, that's a problem because they can kick you out of business.
Well, if you're not charging that much per song or per book in the first place, it's really not going to be profitable for another company to take it over and undersell you. It's generally only the, as I said before, the big blockbuster artists, authors, musical creators who come out ahead under copyright because they're charging so much over the price, so much above the actual cost of production, that it makes it profitable for piracy to undercut that price. But to take my example as a small scale creator, the price I typically set for my on-demand publishing books is something like $1 per copy, and that brings me a couple $100 a month just from selling a few thousand copies a year. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I'm not greedy. If I'd set the markup on it at $5 or $10, that would make it worth someone's while to pirate it.
But what if I, for example, copy your book, put it on my website for free, and just get advertising revenue? So everyone gets it for free. Now I've undercut you significantly, but I'm still making a profit. and I can advertise it more because it's freer, and all I'm making money off of is the people who are selling ads, and so no one has to pay for anything. It seems like you would go out
Well,
of business.
no, not at all. All the books I sell right now, the facsimile PDFs are available for free online. Some people would rather hold a hard copy of the book in their hand. They'd rather be able to mark a number of different passages in the book and flip back and forth between them easily, flip back and forth between the a page of the text and the bibliography or index. I find that making the free PDFs available, if anything, is advertising for people to buy the hard copy who otherwise wouldn't buy it sight unseen.
That seems to be a significant loss of profit for most bookmakers. It seems like if they have the ability to offer to sell theirs, and not have it be produced by other people for free, if they're relatively popular, that will actually get them a living wage level of income. Whereas if they're not, then if they are very popular and it's offered for free, more people will produce or buy the free version or the cheaper book version than your book version. And so you lose most of your income, and most of the effort you put in your book seems to be lost. It seems like in your case, at best, is a very special case, whereas the vast majority of people who write books would only be able to make profit if they did have some kind of monopoly on their own product.
I think it's just the opposite. It's just a handful of people, like Stephen King or Peter Straub or whoever, the big blockbuster writers who are able to make that kind of big income through copyright, and they're the ones who are atypical. For the vast majority of small creators, I think we come out ahead just charging a very small or modest premium per copy and using the PDFs as free advertising for them.
The data I've seen on selling books seems to say the opposite. So like I'm writing a book with several people, or with a co-author, and he's written several books, and it seems like offering the free PDF loses pretty much all of it, and people don't even read it. So like if they just download it and not read it, and it gets you nothing most of the time, very, very few get a promotion of income from that. It doesn't really work. So I don't know what exactly you mean.
All I can say is that my experience with that is different. I think the people who download the free PDFs are people who very likely would not have bought the hard copy anyway. It goes back to the so-called lost sale doctrine that the proprietary content industry uses, where they treat every download as a lost sale, and that's not true. In most cases, I don't think the free download is a lost sale. It's going to someone who probably wouldn't have paid for it anyway, and it's providing word of mouth advertising out there.
I don't think that supports the data on piracy, because piracy is usually the vast majority of pirates would pay some degree, because there's a social cohesion factor. If you're pirating a piece of music that's really popular, you're probably going to pay for the piece of music to fit into society if you can't get it otherwise. It seems like if you outlaw piracy or whatever, or prevent piracy, the company's income does seem to go up. So taking away free downloads does seem to increase profits for the people who have the patents.
That's just it, though. The company's income goes up, but most of that goes to profit of the proprietary content corporation or salaries of executives, rather than to the creator. Musically, the same thing with copyright. If you're the Rolling Stones or Pink Floyd or somebody like that, copyright results in a significant chunk of revenue actually going to you. If you're one of the stable of much smaller artists, very little of that is actually going to go to you.
Right, but again, that's a company issue. The patent is still working in those cases. It's just working for the companies who own the patents. But the problem here is that for any small book writer or music creator or whatever, they would still also incur greater profits if they don't allow them to be free in most cases. Just based on the research of how piracy works. If you outlaw piracy, more people will end up buying it at some price than if you allow for piracy. More people will end up getting it for free and you'll end up making less profit. Seems like the research on piracy is pretty concrete that it does cost the company or the individual money, and putting things for free does not generate them as much profit, except under very, very strange cases, like if they get really popular.
Just in my experience, as long as you keep the markup per copy at a very modest scale, the income you get just from the number of sales is pretty significant, just because the inconvenience of shopping around for a complete or authentic file is more trouble than the minor savings would be worth. Again, that's why music piracy declined so radically when iTunes made songs available at such a cheap price.
I'm not sure what you mean. Like it hasn't really gone down. It's gone up. Like when they banned Napster, it went down. But when Napster was available, there was a huge amount, and that's when it went down. Is when they banned Napster.
Just, according to the sources I read, like Mike Masnick at Tech Dirt, it did, become a much more marginal or insignificant problem after the introduction of iTunes, because there's a convenience premium that makes paying a low price worth it compared to shopping around for the actual authentic copy of a song. I experienced the same thing myself, looking for copies of books, academic books on Z Library or Library Genesis, because it's fairly difficult to find the correct edition, to find one that's in a compatible format for what I can use, and to find one with all of that's got the correct pagination and attached scholarly apparatus and so forth. That if it were available for just like a dollar online with the correct pagination and everything, I'd probably pay that.
Well, most of that is not required for the vast majority of products, like music. You just YouTube it. Movies, you just fake movies all the time that are the correct movie. I don't see most of that as being required to find it online. Like for digital copies, you can find the original copies pretty easily. So you copy digital stuff.
Yeah. All I can say is just based on what I've read from people like Masnick, also things like the freemium promotional model, where you give away the content itself for free, but use the content as advertising to tie the sale to other scarce goods that can't be cheaply replicated, like Fish allowing free file sharing of all their music and free taping at their concerts and so on, who used that for stuff like promoting T-shirt sales. And there's a freemium model like that you can adapt to just about any kind of content, using the basic content itself as free advertising for the sale of other scarce goods that can't be easily replicated. The free software model, where you give away whatever distro of Linux it is for free, but then sell the customization and tech support service attached to it.
Yeah, there are definitely individual cases where that's worked very well, but if that was a successful model, you would expect a vast majority of people to use it. If there's one model that outperforms another model, you would expect that more people would use the more successful model to generate more income. But that model seems to be significantly underused for some reason, and it seems like that reason is that it doesn't really get you much of an income unless you happen to be extremely popular. And there are always those outlier cases, but if this same model was tried by the vast majority of bands, it seems like it would fail tremendously for the vast majority of them. Whereas at least going to like a record company or something will get them some income, some profit that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Well, it's, I think for the vast majority of small bands that aren't making a lot of money, it would be an improvement, and it would come primarily at the expense of the blockbuster acts. We'd be a lot closer to the old folk model of propagation than to the top 40 model we have today.
How would we test that and falsify that theory? Is there a way to show that we could do this experiment, and if it didn't work, it would falsify the prediction?
Well, other than just eliminating music copyright and saying if the quality of locally available music and indie levels proliferated significantly, I suppose that would falsify it.
But I mean more like on a smaller scale. So suppose we had like 10 bands who decided to try the free model and they all flopped. Would that be a good indicator that it's not a good model to use? And or if we had 10 bands and 10 bands using the copyright model, and we could measure the success rate of the two different competing groups and see one has more success than the others, would that be a good indicator of one model being better than another model?
Well, I think we could try something like starting out by scaling back copyright, reducing the term.
Well, why would we have to start with that? Why couldn't we start with just a bunch of bands doing the free model and see if that works?
There are bands now doing the free model that think it works.
Yes, but most of them don't. There's millions of bands doing that. It's what YouTube is. Most of them fail. The vast majority of them fail. So like my question is more, without having to scale back large governmental policies, is there a way to test the model on like a company basis? Can we start a company, apply this basis, and how would we test its effectiveness versus the more patent-based model without having to make large governmental changes?
Well, just doing it on a small individual level, it seems to me, pretty hard to do that in a way that overcomes the, current cultural or institutional bias towards the copyright model. I've mentioned there are individual bands that have tried it and found it satisfactory, but how you would promote that in a concerted manner just as an individual choice rather than changing the structural factors, it's hard to say. To me, it's like the dichotomy between promoting conservation or recycling as just an individual lifestyle issue versus changing the structural factors in the economy that cause waste. When you do things as just an individual lifestyle choice, you're necessarily going to be swimming upstream against the general direction of the culture.
What do you mean by cultural bias? Like in the case of a product, I don't understand there being like, people don't say, "Oh, look, a patent. I'm going to buy the one with a patent." I don't understand like what the cultural bias there would be.
But you do have the cultural bias in the structure of the music industry itself. The media corporations, the tendency of people that go into the music industry following what's regarded as a conventional marketing model.
What impact does that have on testing the two different models? I don't get it.
Well, just the likelihood that individual actors would go against the stream when you've got a predominant institutional culture of a certain type. About all you can do is just look at individual cases that use alternative ways of doing things. Like I mentioned, Fish, also Radiohead marketing albums as free downloads online. And that sort of thing, and just look at the individual small minority of individual cases that tried it and found it satisfactory, and extrapolate from that.
Yeah, so I mean, like, could you or people like you who advocate for this policy do more advertising, try to convince bands to like sponsor bands to try this metric and see if it can collect data to show it works? Like, it seems like if you believe this model is likely to be successful, then put your money where your mouth is, essentially. Sponsor some bands to try this model and see if it is actually successful at the same rate or at a higher rate. And if it is, you can post that data and encourage more people to use it. But when it seems to be tested, it seems to not work, as far as I can tell.
No. Well, I'm not really in a position to sponsor anything myself.
Could you make a coalition of people who are with a similar ideology as you and try to do it that way?
Well, I mean, I already mentioned Mike Masnick. He's one of the primary people promoting this model. I don't know how much traction his advocacy gets. I've advocated for the same thing in my writing, but there's only a certain amount of stuff you can do against the cultural zeitgeist you live under. But in that regard, all I can say is I'm quite satisfied with the income I'm getting right now as a very small scale producer compared to what I figure I would have gotten through the alternative, selling uncopyrighted material on a print-on-demand basis and giving away the PDFs for free. And I think I'm probably making more sales doing it that way and marketing directly online myself, just through viral marketing to my own niche readership, than I would with a conventional publisher's marketing department going through the standard motions of promoting it.
So in the case of like political debates, political conversations, it seems to me the most effective strategy to compel people to adopt your political position is to use that to start a company and have it be successful, wildly successful. It's got to be one of the millionaire companies.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no one's going to be inspired by it. And so like I have my own political theory, and I'm trying to start a nonprofit company to lower the cost of living for as many people as much as possible. And it seems to me that until we get hard data that we have a person with a political theory that they think will work and they can put it into practice and demonstrate it succeeds at that high level, it seems hard to take the political theory seriously. And the complaint that we have to fight against social norms or current political norms, that doesn't seem to be as applicable, because in a capitalistic market as we have, you can start a company very, very easily, and getting donors and angel investors and things really isn't that hard. I've already found multiples of them. So it should be hypothetically possible for any group of people who advocates for some political ideology to start building a company and demonstrate it could succeed. And if it works at the multi-million-dollar level, that's really going to be the more compelling fact that will make their ideology stand out compared to the other ones.
Well, I think the whole thing with multi-million-dollar companies is the problem in the first place. If the proliferation of an idea or practice results in the concentration of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in the hands of one entity, that right there shows that some form of economic rent extraction is taking place. And the whole point of the alternative ways of doing things is to keep that money in the hands of the immediate creators or the consumers themselves, and prevent that surplus from going to the owners of a corporation. So, what you mentioned, finding ways to make living cheaper for ordinary people. If you come up with new technologies or techniques of living that make living cheaper, and they're proliferated, as I advocate, on an open source, small scale basis, the benefits are going to immediately accrue to the people who adopt them, rather than to an organization that encloses the benefits through patents in order to extract a revenue from them.
That's a really great example, because if that was the case, I wouldn't do it. Like, the reason I'm doing it is because I want money. I want to be the millionaire. And it seems to me the vast majority of people who start companies, is the reason they do it is they want to be the millionaire. They want to be the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musk. And so that incentive of trying to be the super successful one is what drives most people to start companies. It's not because they just have a moral inclination to want to benefit society, is they want to be the millionaire. And if we get rid of that, it seems like our society is going to lose one of the primary motivations of why people start companies in the first place.
Well, that assumes right there that, starting companies, and I'm making air quotes here, is the primary way of doing things, as opposed to, entirely different models of alternative technology. To take one example, I don't know if you've ever heard of the open source ecology project.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. They're a nonprofit. Every kind of machinery they design, and their machinery is like an entire product ecology of dozens of different machines, either micro manufacturing machinery or farm equipment, and so on, that's designed on an open source basis, with the designs made publicly available, prototypes. And the whole point of it is for people to be able to adopt it on a local basis, rather than to make money for the project.
Sure, but how does that address the point that the vast majority of people are motivated by greed? And so the reason the vast majority of people start companies is to make money. And if they're not going to get some disproportionate amount of the economy, then wouldn't most people stop making companies? They wouldn't care anymore. If there's no reason to buy in, no lottery ticket, and people are no like $1 million reward to a lottery ticket, nobody's going to buy a lottery ticket. So it seems like companies are very much like lottery tickets, and that the vast majority of them fail. But the reason people start them is because they want the $1 million. They want the super big thing. And so if we lose that, we lose all companies, or the vast majority of companies just wouldn't be started. All of the small ones, hair salons, nail salons, small businesses all over the world just wouldn't exist, because the whole point is they want to make money.
But that's looking at it from the side, of the primary motivation involved in starting companies. And it's that starting companies model, which we keep coming back to. I think it makes more sense when we're looking at an alternative economy to start from the perspective of the consumers and immediate producers trying to support their own immediate consumption on a local basis, and organize the production of the things they want to consume, rather than I'm going to come up with this new way of producing things for other people to sell that I can make a lot of money off of. It's we've got this local economy. We've got these physical needs that need to be met. What's the best way of organizing this production at the lowest cost to ourselves with the least amount of labor and so forth? So, I think it makes more sense to look at it from the bottom up of producers organizing the production of their own consumption goods rather than someone starting a company to make money.
I agree that would be the logical or moral way to look at it. But when I look at human nature and I compare the two models, like which is going to encourage more people to start more variety of companies and have a larger technological and different kinds of growth, or so in this case it wouldn't be companies, it would be just technologies or whatever, which one is going to innovate more on certain technologies, then it seems like the one that incentivizes people to try stuff because of the $1 million prize is going to incentivize more people to try more things. And so um, that version of the economy will have a larger amount of growth, kind of like an evolution. The more kind of evolution you have, the more kind of genetic diversity you have, the more likely you are to find the super big successes that are technologically advantageous for the society. And so the one that promotes the most innovation, the most trying things, is going to be a significantly more successful model. And so because companies offer that, you could get the $1 million reward. It seems like a society that allows for companies, rather than simply trying to uh, solve the resource-based needs of their society, the one that allows the companies will encourage more innovation and trying stuff along with more failures, and that society will overall do better simply based on evolutionary principles.
Well, one of the main things I've focused on in my research and writing in recent years has just been things like the technological changes that reduce the scale of production technology and the scale of the projects required to create new production technologies, the amount of cost and overhead entailed in organizing production or in developing new innovations. And I think the result, overall result of this is a shift towards innovation and production both being much more feasible at a smaller level and a much smaller cost. So I think just from a technological perspective, we're headed in a direction where a lot more just the basic organization of how we do things is at a decentralized bottom up level.
Well, awesome. We've been going for about an hour. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Could you tell us where we could find your work, check your Amazon page, those kind of things for anyone interested?
Yeah, you can find me on Amazon under Kevin Carson. I've got an author page there. I've got a main website called kevinacarson.org that has links to PDFs of all of my books and to my academia.edu and ResearchGate pages and so forth. Other than that, I really appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Thanks again for coming on, and I will let you go. Talk to you later.
Okay, thank you.